I mean, is Pakistan going to have the stomach much longer for the US to be making these stealth incursions into its sovereign territory to take out these Al-Qaeda and...
I think the problem is Pakistan has never had control. So, you know, we in the West tend to think of, well, there's a map and it's green or yellow, so it's a country. And many of the areas that the Taliban work in have never been controlled by the Pakistan government. And so they can wave their hands about sovereignty, but they can't stop you from coming in because they don't have control of them. So at least on that ground, I think that American troops will be able to go in and do what you said, and there'll be a lot of hand waving, but I don't think...
as long as we don't try and put troops on the ground in Waziristan.
Yeah.
But there aren't any Pakistan troops on the ground there either.
Yeah.
Jeff, I want to ask you about China. Let's stick with Asia for the time being. US foreign policy towards China has seemed to me in recent years to be a mixture of things, hoping for positive outcomes but hedging against negative ones. Do you think that under the Obama administration we'll see a continuation of that, or will it be different?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I would call it something like wary coexistence, where the US is not going to embrace China but understands how important China is, both geopolitically and economically. I don't see how that would be different, how the broad tendency would be different under Obama, but I think there are some things that might change a little bit that we might look for. The first one is that let's talk about the broad economic relationship. It's been a sort of T-bills for trade relationship for 10 years. China buys treasury bills in the US to allow Americans to spend lots of money buying Chinese goods. That relationship will probably continue, even though China is getting lower and lower interest rates on their T-bill purchases at the moment. You know, it's amazing to me. The US-China budget trade deficit last year was $250 billion. Even in a year when global trade is going to be down, that deficit's going to be higher. It's a remarkable thing. I mean, just think about that. Let's say it's close to $300 billion in trade asymmetry. That's a really big deal. But I think the economic relationship is, while that's going on, turning from one based mostly on trade to one where investment is going to play a really big part of the story. And I think the investment story isn't necessarily going to be very comfortable politically. In the first instance, China's holding all this money. They're getting low returns on treasury bills. The American stock market is down. What do? You buy American companies. But I'm not sure that the American public and American Congress is ready to have Chinese ownership of large swathes of the US economy. I mean, I said yesterday at a lunch to a group of business people that the win-win economic move is for China to buy General Motors. You know, I think it'd be good for GM because they're making money in China and it would help China consolidate their automobile industry. But it's a political non-starter. But I think those investment issues are going to be big. The second thing so Obama's challenge on the economic side, I think, is going to be to do what Democratic presidents have typically done, which is hew much more to the center and to the economic openness center against their party. That'll be doubly hard for Obama because of the human rights left in the Democratic Party, embodied in Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who has a long track record of being one of China's harshest critics on human rights. So I would imagine that Obama would do a steady-as-you-go Bush course on China, but there's going to be a lot of pressure, protectionist pressure on the left, China-bashing pressure, coupled with this human rights left that I think he'll try to resist, and the question will be whether he'll be able to do that.
And I think there's also a suspicion in the Pentagon about Chinese military build-up. David, how do you see Congress moving on the China issue, given these points that Jeff's raised?
I want to remind you that in 1992, Bill Clinton campaigned against the North American Free Trade Agreement, campaigned saying we won't give China most favored trade nation status, will not allow China into the World Trade Organization. And China has most favored trade nation status, is a member of the World Trade Organization, was brought into the World Trade Organization by none other than Bill Clinton. When push comes to shove, now that we're done with the campaigning and the hand-waving to the labor unions in the United States on the Democratic Party side, the fact is that most of the growth in the U.S. economy in the last year consumer spending was flat, all occurred as a result of trade with China. And the fact is that no government, no Congress cannot afford to allow these sorts of declarations to cut down the. If you were in a business, you said, "Okay, we don't want you to be in China. I know it's the market that's going to drive the world economy, or India. Don't be in there because they do things we don't like." That just doesn't happen for businesses, and as soon as the threat occurs, those businesses line up, and in the Clinton administration, say Bob Matsui, a Democratic congressman from Sacramento, who's unfortunately passed away, his wife has succeeded him, there'll be about 120 Democrats who are so dependent on trade with China in the local economy that they'll come around. And I agree with Jeff, he'll face more pressure because he's a Democrat, but in the end, the 218th, the deciding member in the United States House of Representatives, is a blue dog Democrat, which means they're not as liberal as Nancy Pelosi. There's about 71 members of the Progressive Coalition in the House, and they're not going to determine U.S. foreign policy toward China.
Michael, how do you see it?
About the same way. But going back to your question about the Pentagon, it's the Pentagon's job to look out there and find dangers out there, and they do a good job. But I mean, that's how you get promoted from major to lieutenant colonel, and from lieutenant colonel to colonel. You go out there and you do plans, and the Pentagon has plans for everything. They probably have plans to save Australia from the next invasion. But to be serious,
there could be a story in that for me, actually.
I thought that was serious.
To be serious, China's global military reach, I don't see it. I think they want to be recognized as a great power, and part of being recognized is to have that military power. They want to be able to exert influence around their part of Asia. But having a navy that sails up the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, no. The Chinese are not that foolish. Their desire for international recognition and, to some extent, hegemony is going to be based on economics, first of all.
Jeff, if I can go back to a point you raised earlier, which was that the attitude around the world was about 4-1 in favour of seeing Obama elected ahead of McCain. Yet in the United States, the figures were much closer together. How do you explain that difference?
Well, I think the thing that, based on my 6 months here now and my time in the US, I think the clearest thing is that the world just wanted to turn the page on the Bush administration as definitively as possible, and Barack Obama embodied that.
And do you think that in America, Americans didn't want it quite so much?
No, I think they did, but what has been, I think, concealed, probably mostly by the continuities in the rhetoric of the Bush administration, is that the US has started this process of self-correction away from sort of Bush 1 a long time ago. Just look at, I think the world gave up on the US when President Bush was re-elected in 2004. I think it was the Daily Mirror in England had the headline, "How can, whatever it was then, 56 million Americans be so dumb?" That was the headline. The world gave up then. What happened in the second Bush administration was Bush policy became kinder and gentler and closer to the global mainstream. Gates and Petraeus became the big players on foreign policy, not Cheney and Rumsfeld. The Democrats won a decisive referendum against the Iraq War in the 2006 congressional elections. The Supreme Court ruled 3 times against Guantanamo Bay in succession. My sense is that Americans understood that change had happened. And of course the fact that John McCain, people believed that John McCain wasn't a George Bush Republican for a long time. He had a lot of history there, and it was only the economic, it was, I don't want to rehearse all of that, but it was only the economic crisis that tied McCain to Bush. Before that, McCain was doing fine on his own. So I think that what the world wanted from the U.S. it was so black and white. My sense is in the US there were more shades of grey, and people understood that the reality was already changing under their feet.
Let's move a little bit more into the domestic arena now. David, what do you think Obama needs to do to ensure that this downturn in the US economy is over as quickly as possible?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask on
that. That's in the same school as the Pakistan question, really.
I know. That's why I was trying to avoid it.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
There's a job.
I hadn't noticed
economic
that.
Advisors.
So my view of that is that what he has to do is the stimulus package is fine, but it should be a large stimulus package that actually creates jobs. As I said earlier, and it has to be pretty big. It can't be the tax refund, the tax rebate they had before. It has to be something that creates jobs. The sooner the better. And so that's one thing. The second thing, in my view, he has to do to be successful is he has to use his popularity, both in the United States and around the world, to constrain the point that Jeff made. The progressive part of the Democratic Party has been sort of frustrated for 20 years. They had Clinton, no health care, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be a huge push from that wing of the party to go ahead and spend on all these programs. And in my view, economically, that you can't possibly spend the $150 billion on alternative energy sources, the $4,000 for every college student, the energy. You just can't do all those things, including health care. And you can't do all those things and have the economy grow. So he has to use his popularity, as Bill Clinton did from 95 on, to keep the progressive wing of the party from getting too far out ahead of what's necessary to grow the economy. If he can do that, and they can get a stimulus package or economic recovery package that works, then he has a good chance of being reelected.
Michael, do you think it's right that it's hard to respond to an economic crisis at the same time as you reform healthcare and develop more climate change friendly policies?
Yes, for the reasons David outlined, but I think the inclination of Obama and the people around him is to try and do it as a package, to not just rely on economic stimulus, but to do an economic recovery program that would include the clean energy, that would begin to deal with healthcare. I don't think Australians realize how much of an issue healthcare is in the United States. When we're not obsessing about our 401ks, which is where our pensions used to be, we are asking each other, do you have health care with your job? Is it any good? Have they cut it back? Have they increased your premiums? Have they increased your co-pays? Obama and McCain heard at every stop they made about health care. It's going to be hard not to do that, but it's going to be very costly to do it at the same time. To go back to the original point, I think there will be an effort to put as much together as possible so it's cogent, so it knits together, so that it makes some sense. But is it expensive? Yeah. $1 trillion deficit. That's about the size of the Australian GDP. Well, when the dollar is a little stronger. But that's a lot of money. But that's our government budget deficit going forward.
A lot of Obama's attention is going to be taken up dealing with crises in the foreign arena and then also with the economy. What do you think, though, that he's actually passionate about on the domestic agenda? What do you think he'd be most interested in? I mean, we know Hillary Clinton, for example, was desperately interested in healthcare reform. Do you think Obama is particularly passionate about that?
It's hard to kind of put passion and Obama together.
Yeah, exactly.
This is Mr. Cool and Collected. He projects the image of the reserved intellectual. I think he does get passionate when he gets into his vision moment. His vision for America, the vision for a transformed America, a transformed world. That he is quite passionate about and is clearly quite persuasive. It's his best moments.
Just, you may be passionate about it, but there's not much specificity in that change that we like, change that we hope for, sort of thing. So I also think that a control guy, he's a guy who, this is the most amazing thing about Barack Obama. You smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. A year ago, he quit and he lost weight. Now that's just phenomenal. I mean, I'm just so stunned by that. That's not a guy who gives in to ordinary sorts of things.
It's fascinating that he is, as you say, so reserved and cool and calm. And as you say, you don't generally associate passion with him as an individual, yet he inspires great passion and great feeling among people.
Among 52% of the American public. I think this is a little overblown. You know, the thing that Jeff mentioned earlier about why it was the economy that turned it over. After Senator Clinton lost, that's right after the Super Tuesday, when they came out about even on that, but she lost about 9 straight primaries. And partly because her campaign was in disarray. But then when she went, at that point, they got their act together and they went after Obama on this issue of does he have the experience? Is he capable of leading? That's the same issue that carried over in the campaign. And as it carried over in the campaign, it wasn't until the economy hit that you got the solution to that. So. Frankly, it doesn't bother me that he's a cool character. It strikes me as that in our poll results, we found that people like that about him in the economy when McCain was jumping up and down and running back and forth. People like the fact that he stayed out. So I think that's probably a good characteristic. Jack Kennedy had that same character. He could give a great speech. But then he could walk away from it and be again calculating. So Obama seems to have that same sort of even charismatic characteristic as Kennedy did.
I said earlier that I'd return to the Republican Party and how they're now going to rebuild and redefine themselves out of office. How do you think that process is going to unfold? What sort of a Republican Party are we going to see emerge from the ashes of the Bush administration?
Well, that's a hard question because, you know, I remember 1964, it was Lyndon Johnson won an overwhelming victory, and oh my God, the Republicans are dead. They're dead all over the country. And in 1968, Richard Nixon was elected, and there was a long actual string of only Southerner Democrats could get elected. And again, in 1976, when Jerry Ford lost, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth. How will the party redefine itself? And then in 80, you got Reagan, and again, a string of Republicans. I think the one thing that distinguishes this time period is that roughly since 1980, there's roughly the American public is divided into 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Independent, 1/3 Republican. And if you look at all of the major polls, there now is a 6 to 8 point gap. That is, there are now about 26% Republicans, 35% Democrats, and the rest independents. And because of this YouGov, because of this internet poll that YouGov Polymetrics uses that Jeff mentioned earlier, we're able to go back and interview a sample of 5,100 people, 5,100 people, 1,700 Republicans and Democrats, independents. And it turns out that the people who left the Republican Party, it's not an insignificant, moved to independent or became Democrats, were 2 things. One, they were very anti-George Bush. That's something that's correctable because Bush isn't president anymore. But on the other hand, there was the movement was about an equal number of people who were tired of the Republican views on issues like gay marriage, pro-choice abortion, et cetera, and the social issues had driven them away. So my view is the Republican Party has to deal with the question, first of all, there are fewer of them. And if and now given the election results, the Congressional Party, which is in some ways the representative of the Republic, is even further right because the Republicans who lost tended to be more moderate. So and now this battle then is going to be fought, where's the heart of the Republican Party? Is it to the middle? My view is if they don't find a way to move to the middle, if it's Sarah Palin, Huckabee wing of the party that wins out, then the number of people who leave the party and move to the ranks of the Democrats or independents will be greater, in which case the Republicans will be a real minority party for a considerable time into the future, as they were from about 1930 till 1980. So it's quite possible for them. On the other hand, they could get lucky, and if the Obama presidency doesn't work out too well, they could just, without having to rethink what they really were about or what it meant to be a conservative, they could just bounce back up because the economy wasn't doing well. I personally hope that doesn't happen and that they have to sit back and think through what it means to be a conservative. But that's going to go around, it's going to go around candidates. And my view is there's no person in the party now that can take that role. So I believe that the next Republican leader is going to come out of some governorship as a result of the 2010 election, a Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, somebody like that does well. They're going to look for a winner, and the money in the Republican Party will look for a winner, and that's where they're going to look.
What do you think, Michael? Do you think the Republican Party is going to go more back towards the centre or perhaps further right?
I'm looking at the history of the Whigs. They've gone away.
They've gone away, yeah.
I think your analysis is right. The social conservatives are going to, the more moderates have been boiled off, as it were, and the social conservatives are left there, and
or right there.
or right there, you're almost looking for someone to go out and say, let's take back the party from these people. I don't see that person at the moment.
Let me ask one final question of our panel, and then I'll open the floor up to questions, and it's about the Bush administration. The History Network in the US polled about 100 professional historians recently. 99% judged the Bush presidency a failure, and 61% concluded this president was the worst in American history. If you broadened that to be one of the worst, it was 96%. Fair or unfair, David?
Well, historians aren't noted for being conservative Republicans.
Fair.
I discussed this with my friend David Kennedy, the Pulitzer Prize winning, who wrote Free from Fear. I agree that as things presently stand, he'll go down as one of the 3 to 5 worst. However, one can imagine circumstances when it doesn't turn out quite so badly. The first would be that the Iraq War turns out to be a success, whatever that might mean. And the second thing is, if on the recalibration of the presidency, as I talked about earlier, it turns out there's not all that much difference between a Democratic and a Republican president because the threat is more significant than we thought it was, those would raise him out of the bottom 3. But I don't think, and I do want to say one thing, that he has been a great help to his father, because actually over the last 5 years, his father has risen 3 or 4 points in those polls.
Michael?
I can't top that.
Do you think that history will judge Bush as one of the worst?
Oh, yes. From where we sit now, yes. It's hard to think in modern times of someone who's done a worse job.
What about the fact that there hasn't been another domestic terrorist attack on US soil under his watch?
Well, thank God.
Surely that's one thing that...
Yeah, but is it attributable to him? Is it attributable to the security services, which were reorganized.
Is it luck?
To luck. I mean, Homeland Security is a monstrous organization, and it's not better than what we had. I think it's as attributable to the men and women who stand guard every day than it is to George Bush.
Jeff?
I'm reminded of, David has a colleague, somebody I read when I was in graduate school. I love this book. It's a guy called Mo Fiorina who wrote a book called Retrospective Voting in American Elections. And he had a cartoon on the inside cover of the book that I'll never forget, which was a bunch of bankers staring out at a blizzard in their club, and they had big armchairs and they, cigars and brandies, and they're looking out at the winter, and they say, "We never had winters like this before Jimmy Carter was elected." Voters are irrational gods of vengeance and reward, it seems to me. So the real question, I think the analytic question, is how much is President Bush actually responsible for? So when I look at this, the only thing that I see that he's responsible for, and the thing that gives him the biggest black mark, I would say probably parenthetically deservedly so, is the Iraq War. And I think that's the core of anti-Americanism, in fact, is the Iraq War. The world came together with the US after September 11 and supported the invasion of Afghanistan. Everything went pear-shaped when Bush decided to invade Iraq. Let's look at the economy. Why did what happened to the US economy happen? It happened because of a global savings glut aided and abetted by the heretofore genius Alan Greenspan, who became the devil overnight. Is George Bush responsible for Alan Greenspan? No. So anyway, I think that at the end of the day, anti-Americanism and the negative reviews on the Bush administration are about the Iraq War and the sort of pugnacious, in-your-face unilateralism that went with that. The ugly American at its highest point. If you strip back everything else, Bush faced some really tough things and probably didn't do a good job. But I think it's the Iraq War.
We are out of time. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance tonight. Please thank our panel.